I wake up every morning at 6 o'clock. Not because I have to, but because my body remembers. 40 years on a lighthouse taught me to feel time without a clock. 15 years of retirement haven't changed that. My old house in Port Haven creaks like an old schooner. It stands on a rocky outcrop by the sea, close to the lighthouse that was my life. The view from my bedroom window is always the same: gray sky, gray sea, and the white tower of the lighthouse in the distance. Now it's run by machines. No one needs old keepers like me, Martha Fallowfield. I go down to the kitchen and put the kettle on. My hands, with their veins and wrinkles, reach for the tin of tea. It's an old habit. Strong tea in the morning to clear the fog in my head. Tamsin called yesterday and said she'd be coming over with the children today. My daughter doesn't call often, usually when she needs a babysitter for the weekend. I don't mind. Liam and Astrid are the only bright and real things left in my life. I check the fridge. It's almost empty. I'll have to go to the store. I pull out an old jacket with a hood. Winter in Port Haven isn't snow and frost, but a damp, bone-chilling wind from the ocean. Before I leave, I look at the photo on the dresser. James, my husband, has been smiling at me from it for 20 years. That's how long it's been since the fishing boat didn't come back to port. I'll be back soon, I say to the photo and step out into the gray day. Port Haven Grocery is one of the few places in town I visit regularly. The owner, Maggie, nods to me when I walk in. She doesn't try to strike up a conversation. She knows I'm not one for small talk. I grab the essentials: milk, bread, eggs, oranges for Astrid, and chocolate bars for Liam. "Are the grandchildren coming?" Maggie asks when I reach the cash register. "Yes," I reply curtly, but not rudely. I've just never been good at making small talk with neighbors. "That's wonderful. They grow up so fast." She smiles, handing me my change. "Liam must be 14 now?" "He turned 14 in March," I nod. On my way home, I run into Heather, the only person I can call a friend. She waves at me from across the street and, despite the drizzling rain, crosses over to me. "Martha, I called you yesterday, but you didn't answer," she says, a slight reproach in her voice. "My phone battery died," I lie. In reality, I just didn't want to talk. Some days are like that. "Have you heard the news? They're going to rebuild the old pier into a tourist center. The town meeting is on Wednesday." Heather is always up to date on local news. "Let them do what they want," I shrug. "Tourists never stay here long anyway." "You could come. Your opinion matters. You are the keeper of the lighthouse, after all." Heather smiles. "Former keeper," I correct her, "and my job was to watch the light, not what was happening on shore." Heather shakes her head. She's used to my aloofness, but she still tries to draw me into town life. It's a waste of time. After a few more minutes of conversation, we say goodbye, and I walk home, feeling the grocery bag weighing down my arm. At home, I unpack the groceries and start cooking dinner. Meat stew with vegetables is a dish that Tamsin's husband, Bryce, loves. He's a quiet, calm man who is always polite to me but keeps his distance. Sometimes I think he's afraid of me. Perhaps Tamsin has told him some less than flattering stories about me. Cooking keeps my hands busy, but not my mind. My thoughts return to the past, to when Tamsin was little and lived here in this house with James and me. I remember how she cried when I left for my night shift at the lighthouse. "Mummy, stay," she would cry, clinging to my skirt. But the lighthouse was more important than anything else. The ships at sea relied on me, on my light. I couldn't let them down. I couldn't not go. James was better with her. He had a gentleness that I always lacked. "Let's build a fort out of blankets," he would say, distracting her from my departure. And I'll tell you a story about a mermaid and a lighthouse. When James died, Tamsin was 16. She withdrew into herself and hardly spoke to me. And I didn't know how to be a mother without him. The only thing I knew how to do was make sure the light on the lighthouse was always on. So I did what I knew. I went to the lighthouse and left her alone. 2 years later, she left to attend college in Portland and never returned. She would visit on weekends and Christmas, but never for long. Then she met Bryce, got married, had Liam, and 4 years later is Astrid. My life went on as usual: the lighthouse, loneliness, and occasional phone calls from my daughter. When the lighthouse was automated 15 years ago, I thought I would die. What would I do now? Who needed me? But life went on, and I learned to fill my days with other things: reading, knitting, long walks along the shore, and visits from my grandchildren, which became less and less frequent. The doorbell interrupts my memories. I wipe my hands on my apron and go to open the door. Tamsin is standing on the doorstep with her children. My daughter is a beautiful woman of 42, with dark blonde hair like mine when I was young, but with James's eyes, bright blue and always a little troubled. "Hi, Mom." She kisses me on the cheek. I can smell her perfume, something floral and delicate. "Grandma!" Astrid hugs me, pressing herself against me. She's 10 and still isn't shy about showing her feelings. Liam stands behind her, tall for his age, with tousled brown hair. He raises his hand awkwardly in greeting. "Hello, Grandma," he says quietly. "Come in," I say, letting them into the house. "Where's Bryce?" "He's at work in Ellsworth, tuning the organ at the new church. He'll join us tomorrow," Tamsin explains, taking off her coat. Astrid immediately runs to the living room. There, in the bottom drawer of the dresser, I keep a box of seashells and sea glass that I collect on the beach for her. "Can I take some for my collection?" she calls from the room. "Of course," I reply, trying to keep my voice soft. It's easier with Astrid. Liam slowly walks into the kitchen, looking around as if he's never been here before, although I hardly ever change anything in the house. "What's that?" I ask, noticing a small box in his hands. "Just something I'm working on," he shrugs, clearly not wanting to share. Tamsin interjects. "Liam makes mechanical puzzles. He wanted to show Grandma his new invention." The boy reluctantly opens the box and takes out a wooden cube with lots of small parts, buttons, and levers. "I designed the mechanism myself," he says, getting a little excited. "You have to find the right sequence of actions to open the secret compartment inside." I look at the intricate toy in his hands. The first thing that comes to mind is what a waste of time, but I hold back. "That's interesting," I say. "Did you make it yourself?" "Yes," he replies with a hint of pride. "Mr. Collins from the school workshop helped me with some of the tools, but the design is all mine." "And how long did you spend on this puzzle?" I ask, and immediately see Tamsin's expression change. She knows where I'm going with this. "About a month," Liam replies, "but I worked on it after school and—" "A month on a toy?" I can't help myself. "At your age, it would be more useful to learn something practical." "Your grandfather was helping to repair boats at the dock when he was 14. The boy's face closes like an oyster. He carefully puts the puzzle back in the box. "It's not just a toy," he says quietly. "It's an engineering problem." "Mom," Tamsin interrupts, her voice tense. "Liam won first place at the school science fair with this project. He's been invited to the regional competition." "Really?" I try to sound impressed, but I'm not very convincing. "Yes," Tamsin says, putting her arms around her son's shoulders, "and we're very proud of him." "Well, congratulations," I say, "but practical skills never hurt. Maybe you could work at the port this summer. They always need helpers there." Liam looks at the floor. "Actually," he says almost in a whisper, "I'm going to summer engineering camp at MIT. I got a scholarship." I raise my eyebrows in surprise. My grandson is going to MIT? Instead of saying how surprised and proud I am, what comes out of my mouth is, "Boston? That far away? Who's going to look after you?" "It's a prestigious program, Mom," Tamsin says, clearly losing patience. "It's fully supervised." "Liam has earned it." Of course," I nod, realizing that I've ruined everything again. I'm just worried. At that moment, Astrid bursts into the kitchen with a box of seashells. "Grandma, look what I found. This mother of pearl will be perfect for my fairy's wings." "Fairies?" I ask again. "I'm making a diorama of an enchanted forest," the girl explains, "with fairies, elves, and talking animals. They'll all be made from natural materials." "Very creative," I say, not knowing how to respond to her enthusiasm. "When I was a child, there was no time for fairies and elves. How are your lessons? Math? History?" Astrid deflates a little. "Fine," she replies without her previous enthusiasm. "Mrs. Jenkins says I need to try harder in math." "That's important," I nod. "You can't get anywhere without math." I used it every day at the lighthouse. Calculations, logarithmic tables. Yes, Grandma, you told me, Astrid sighs. Tamsin gives me a warning look. Why don't you get settled in and I'll finish dinner, she suggests. Mom, I'll help you. The children go upstairs to the rooms I've prepared for them. When Tamsin and I are alone, she turns to me. Mom, you could at least encourage their interests a little, she says quietly but firmly. I do, I defend myself. I just want them to be prepared for real life. It's not all fairies and puzzles. Liam is a gifted engineer. His puzzles aren't toys, they're real inventions. And Astrid's imagination develops her creative thinking. Why do you always have to belittle everything? I'm not belittling them, I argue. You're doing the same thing you did to me, Tamsin interrupts, and I hear the old pain in her voice. Nothing is ever good enough. Nothing deserves praise unless it's practical, serious, useful by your standards. I stir the stew silently. What can I say? That it's the only way I know how to survive? That my father raised me this way? Try to just be happy for them, Tamsin says more gently. No buts. No advice on how they can be better. Just accept them for who they are. I'll try, I promise. Not sure I can keep it. Lunch is relatively peaceful. I try to follow Tamsin's advice and ask Liam about his puzzle and Astrid about her fairy forest. The children perk up and talk, but I can sense their wariness. They're waiting for the catch, the criticism that is sure to follow. And it breaks my heart to realize that my own grandchildren are afraid to open up to me. After lunch, Liam helps me with the dishes while Tamsin and Astrid put things away. We work in silence until I decide to speak. So, how does your puzzle work? I ask, trying to sound genuinely interested. Liam gives me a suspicious look, but then decides to explain. There's a locking system. You have to press certain buttons in the right order to unlock the next level. There are 5 levels in total, and each one has its own logic. Sounds complicated, I remark. Not really, once you get the hang of it, he says with a slight smile. Want to try? My first impulse is to decline. Why waste time on a toy? But then I remember Tamsin's words and nod. Okay, show me. Liam takes out his puzzle, and we spend the next 20 minutes at the kitchen table. I try to follow his instructions, but my fingers aren't as nimble as they used to be. At one point, I press the wrong button and the mechanism jams. Now we have to start over, Liam says, taking the cube from me. Just like life, I sigh. One mistake and you have to start over. Liam looks at me thoughtfully. Not always, he says. I designed a reset system. See that little lever at the bottom? If you press it 3 times, the mechanism returns to the previous level. You don't have to start all over again. I look at my grandson in amazement. I hear something more than just an explanation of a toy in his words. That's clever, I say, and for the first time all day, my praise sounds sincere. In the evening, after the children have gone to bed, Tamsin and I sit in the living room with cups of tea. She talks about her work, restoring antique music boxes, her clients, the challenges of finding original parts. You know, there's an old music box of your father's in the basement, I recall. You might be interested in seeing it. Really? Tamsin perks up. I didn't know Grandpa had a music box. He brought it back from his only trip to Europe before the war. It broke when you were very little. I was going to throw it away, but he wouldn't let me. He said he'd fix it someday. Why didn't you ever tell me? There is a slight reproach in Tamsin's voice. I shrug. I didn't think it was important. It's just an old broken thing. Tamsin shakes her head. It's just a thing to you, but to me it's part of a family history I never knew. I'll take a look at it tomorrow. We sit in silence for a while. Finally, I decide to ask her about what's been bothering me all day. Liam mentioned something about an incident at school. What happened? Tamsin sighs. A group of boys in his class made fun of his puzzles. They called them child's play and called him a nerd and a loser. Typical teenage cruelty. And how did he react? He shut himself off. He refused to go to school for 2 weeks. He said he was sick, but I knew the truth. Bryce and I took him to the school psychologist. He helped, a little. I'm silent, not knowing what to say. There were no school psychologists in my day. There were only strict teachers and even stricter parents who said, pull yourself together and don't be a wimp. Kids can be cruel, I finally say. Yes, Tamsin agrees. That's why it's so important that he feels supported and safe at home with his family, that he knows he's valued for who he is. I understand what she means, and that I failed at that task today. I didn't mean to hurt him, I say quietly. I'm just worried that life will be cruel to him if he doesn't learn to be stronger. Mom, Tamsin looks me straight in the eye. You always think you're preparing us for the harsh reality, but sometimes you are the harsh reality we need protection from. Her words hurt me more than she could ever imagine, but I don't show it. Instead, I take a sip of my cold tea and look out the window at the lighthouse flashing in the darkness. It has always been my guide, my salvation. But maybe for my daughter and grandchildren, I should be something else. Not a harsh lighthouse in a storm, but a quiet harbor where they can shelter from the storm. I don't know if I can be that, but looking at my daughter's tired face, I think that maybe it's not too late to learn. The next morning was surprisingly clear. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, creating intricate patterns on the floor of my bedroom. I woke up earlier than usual, looking forward to the day with my grandchildren. My nighttime conversation with Tamsin was still on my mind. Maybe she was right, and I should be gentler with the children, especially Liam. He reminds me of James, the same pensive look in his eyes, the same ability to immerse himself in his own world. When I went down to the kitchen, I found Astrid already sitting at the table with her sketchbook. Her little fingers were clenched tightly around a colored pencil, and her face was completely focused. "Good morning, little bird," I said, using the nickname I had given her when she was a baby, and chirped constantly in her own language. Astrid looked up and smiled. "Hi, Grandma. I'm drawing your lighthouse. Look." She turned the album to show me her drawing. The lighthouse was much brighter than the real one. Red stripes instead of white, and creatures that looked like birds or fairies were flying around the tower. "Interesting interpretation," I remarked, putting the kettle on, although the real lighthouse is white. "I know," Astrid nodded, "but red is easier to see in a storm, and the guardian fairies help the light penetrate the fog." I almost remarked that no fairies would help if the Fresnel lens broke or the fuel ran out. Instead, I simply asked, "Where are your mom and Liam?" "Mom went to meet Dad at the station, and Liam is still asleep." Astrid returned to her drawing, adding even more fairy tale details. I started making breakfast, deciding to make pancakes, a childhood treat I rarely allow myself when I'm alone. While the batter was resting, I looked out the window. The day promised to be warm by Port Haven standards, so maybe I should take the grandchildren to the beach. Liam would probably find it boring, but Astrid loved collecting seashells and sea-smoothed pebbles. A knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. Strange, Tamsin always came in without knocking, and she was supposed to meet Bryce at the station. Wiping my hands on my apron, I headed for the door. Standing in the doorway were Tamsin, Bryce, and an unfamiliar woman of about 45 with a briefcase in her hands. Her chestnut hair was pulled back into a neat bun, and her attentive brown eyes studied me with professional interest. "Mom," Tamsin looked tense, "this is Dr. Evelyn Price. She's a family psychologist." I froze, not understanding what was happening. "A psychologist?" I asked, looking from my daughter to the stranger and back. "Why do we need a psychologist?" "Can we come in?" Tamsin asked instead of answering. "We need to talk." I stepped back silently, letting them into the house. Thoughts raced through my head. A psychologist? What did Tamsin want to talk about? Had something happened to Liam? To Astrid? We went into the living room where Astrid was still drawing, now at the coffee table. "Sweetie," Tamsin said to her, "please go wake Liam up and gather your things." "But I haven't finished my drawing," the girl protested. "You can finish it at home," Bryce replied gently but firmly. Astrid reluctantly got up and, casting a puzzled glance at us, left the room. "What's going on?" I asked as soon as she was gone. "Why are you taking the kids? We agreed they could stay the whole weekend." Tamsin took a deep breath, as if gathering her strength. "Mom, we need to have a serious talk about your behavior with the kids, especially with Liam." "My behavior?" I felt a wave of indignation rising inside me. "What's wrong with my behavior?" "Dr. Price has agreed to help us with this conversation," Tamsin continued, ignoring my question. "She specializes in family relationships and intergenerational conflict." I glanced at the psychologist, who was watching us calmly. Mrs. Fallowfield, she began in a soft, professional tone, your daughter has come to me because she is concerned about how your interactions are affecting the emotional well-being of her children. What? I could barely contain my indignation. Tamsin, if you have a problem, why can't you tell me directly? Why bring a stranger into my home? Because I've been trying to talk to you for years. Tamsin's voice broke with pain. Every time I try to discuss how you devalue the children's interests, how you make them feel inadequate, you just brush it off or say you're doing it for their own good. I sank into the chair, feeling weak in the knees. I never wanted them to feel inadequate, I said. I just want them to be prepared for real life. That's what I'm talking about, Tamsin exclaimed. To you, their interests, their feelings are never real. You constantly make it clear that what's important to them is a waste of time. Bryce, usually quiet and reserved, suddenly joined the conversation. Martha, last night Liam asked me why his grandmother doesn't love him. Those words hit me harder than a slap in the face. What? That's absurd. Of course I love him. But he doesn't feel it, Bryce continued. He said that no matter what project he shows you, you always find a way to belittle his achievements or suggest something more useful. I'm just giving advice. No, Mom, Tamsin interrupted. You don't give advice, you judge. Anything that doesn't fit into your idea of what's right and useful, you consider a waste of time. That's how you treated me, and now I see the same thing happening to my children. I felt a lump rise in my throat. My eyes stung, but I held back the tears. Lighthouse keepers don't cry. Mrs. Fallowfield, Dr. Price interjected, I understand that this conversation may be painful for you, but believe me, your daughter's goal is not to blame you, but to find a way to a healthier family relationship. A healthy relationship? I asked bitterly. And you call this tribunal a healthy relationship? Mom, Tamsin said wearily, I've tried to talk to you differently, many times, but you never listen. I always listen to you, I objected. You hear me, but you don't listen. Tamsin shook her head. When I talk about my feelings, you say I'm too sensitive. When I talk about Liam's problems, you say he needs to be stronger. You never take our feelings seriously. I looked over at Bryce for support, but he sat with his eyes downcast. The psychologist watched us with an impassive expression. Tamsin, I finally said, trying to sound calm, I raised you the way I thought was right. The world is cruel, and I wanted you to be ready for it. But that doesn't justify your cruelty, she replied quietly. Cruelty? I couldn't believe my ears. When have I been cruel to you? Tamsin laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. Where do I start? How about the time you threw away my rock collection because they were collecting dust? Or when you said my interest in music was a waste of time? Or when you called my first drawing messy and suggested I help you clean up instead? I was speechless, stunned. Did I really do all that? Of course, I remembered some of the episodes, but they didn't seem that significant to me. Those were little things, I finally said. I didn't think you still remembered. They're not little things, Mom. They're moments that shaped my self-image. Tamsin looked very tired. And now I see the same thing happening with Liam and Astrid. I can't let that happen. A heavy silence hung in the room. I felt resentment, anger, and a strange, unfamiliar feeling, shame, struggling inside me. What do you want from me? I finally asked. Dr. Price leaned forward. Mrs. Fallowfield, no one is saying that you are a bad person or a bad grandmother, but certain patterns of behavior that you are exhibiting may be negatively affecting your grandchildren's psychological development. What patterns? I felt my irritation rising again. It all sounded like highbrow psychological nonsense. Criticism, devaluation, conditional love, Dr. Price began to list. When a child feels that they are loved only for certain qualities or achievements, and not simply for who they are, it creates self-doubt and a fear of failure. I never made my love conditional, I objected. Perhaps not intentionally, the psychologist nodded. But when you tell Liam that his project is a waste of time and then immediately suggest a more useful activity, you are unconsciously telling him, what you love and value doesn't matter. I will only approve of you if you do what I consider valuable. I opened my mouth to argue, but couldn't find the words. Did I really make my children feel that way? At that moment, Liam and Astrid entered the room with their bags packed. Liam looked gloomy and avoided my gaze. Astrid looked confused. "Are we leaving?" she asked Tamsin. "But what about the pancakes?" "Another time, sweetie," Tamsin replied, standing up. "We need to go home now." "But why?" Astrid persisted. "We just got here." Tamsin and Bryce exchanged glances. "Grandma needs some time," Bryce said gently. "She has important things to think about." I looked at them, unable to believe what was happening. Were they really leaving? "Tamsin," my voice sounded hoarse, "you can't just take the children away like this." "We had plans." "Mom," Tamsin came over to me, her face softening. "We love you. We really do. But right now, I have to protect my children." "From me?" I felt my heart sink. "You think they need protection from me?" "From certain aspects of your behavior, yes," Tamsin said firmly. "I don't want them to grow up with the same scars I have." "Scars?" The word hung in the air, heavy and accusatory. "Emotional scars, Mom. From constant criticism, from feeling like you're never good enough, that your feelings don't matter." I felt the room start to spin. It was too much. Too many accusations, too much pain that I had caused without even realizing it. "And now what?" I asked quietly. "You're just going to take them and leave?" "Right now, yes," Tamsin nodded, "but not forever. Dr. Price is willing to work with you if you're willing. She'll help you see these patterns and change them." "Are you giving me an ultimatum?" I felt a wave of anger rising inside me. Either I go to a psychologist or I don't see my grandchildren. "I'm asking you to learn how to be emotionally safe for them," Tamsin said quietly but firmly. "How you do that is up to you, but I won't let them feel inadequate anymore just because they don't meet your standards." Liam stood at the door, clutching the strap of his bag tightly. His face was closed, but I noticed his lips trembling. Astrid huddled against her father, looking confusedly from me to her mother. "You can't do this," I said, feeling my voice shake. "They're my grandchildren." "And mine," Tamsin replied. "My first duty is to protect them." Dr. Price stood up and handed me her business card. "Call me when you're ready to talk, Mrs. Fallowfield. Your family wants to rebuild their relationship, but they need your help to do that." I didn't take the card. She placed it on the coffee table and headed for the door. "Mom, please think about it." Tamsin looked as if she was in physical pain from what was happening. "We love you. We want you to be part of our lives, but on healthy terms." I was silent, unable to find the words. How had we come to this? When had my own daughter started to see me as a threat to her children? They left almost as suddenly as they had arrived. I heard their car engine start, the gravel crunching under the wheels. Through the window, I saw Astrid turn and wave at me. Liam sat motionless, staring straight ahead. When the car disappeared from view, I slowly sank into my chair. Dr. Price's forgotten business card lay on the table. Next to it was Astrid's unfinished drawing of a lighthouse with fairies. I felt empty and betrayed. How could Tamsin do this? Bring a stranger into my home, accuse me of traumatizing her, take her children away. It was too cruel. But deep down, in a place I rarely listened to, a quiet voice spoke. What if she was right? What if I really had been hurting her without realizing it? I got up and mechanically headed for the kitchen. The pancake batter was still on the table. I turned off the stove, which I hadn't even turned on, and poured the batter down the sink. Then I poured myself a cup of tea and sat down at the table. On the refrigerator was a photo of our family taken last summer. Tamsin, Bryce, Liam, Astrid, and I were all smiling at the camera. I looked at that photo and didn't recognize myself. When did I become someone who needed to protect children? In a sudden fit of rage, I ripped the photo off the fridge and tore it in half. Then, realizing what I had done, I froze. The two halves of the photo fell to the floor. Now one half was me and the other was my family, divided just like in real life. I knelt down to pick up the pieces and unexpectedly burst into tears. For the first time in many years, tears fell onto the torn photo, blurring the smiling faces of my grandchildren. "Learn to be safe," Tamsin said, as if I were some kind of monster, as if I had ever wished them harm. With a cup of cold tea and the torn photograph in my hands, I sat alone in the kitchen, staring out the window at the lighthouse in the distance. All my life I had been a light guiding the way through the storm. Now I was considered the cause of the storm. Morning came, but for me, the night was not over. I sat in my chair until dawn with the torn photograph in my hands, watching the first rays of sun paint the lighthouse in the distance a soft pink. Usually, this view brought me comfort. Today, it only intensified my loneliness. Once upon a time, this lighthouse was the center of my universe. Now it stood as a silent witness to the collapse of my family. I used to think that the worst thing that had ever happened to me was James' death. Now I realize that losing people who are still alive but don't want to see you is much more painful. With difficulty, I got up from the chair and headed for the bathroom. A stranger stared back at me from the mirror. A haggard face, red eyes, deep wrinkles that seemed to have become even more noticeable overnight. Was this really me? The same unapproachable Martha Fallowfield who was feared by fishermen and respected by sailors? The woman whom her own daughter considered toxic and dangerous? The cold water brought me back to my senses a little. Automatically, without thinking, I made myself breakfast, tea and toast. The food wouldn't go down, but decades of discipline wouldn't allow me to skip a meal. A lighthouse keeper must take care of her health. Other people's lives depend on her. It's funny, but even now I followed rules that had long since become meaningless. After breakfast, I didn't know what to do with myself. Usually on days like this, I would clean the house or read, but I couldn't even bring myself to wash the cup. My gaze fell on the old oak chest of drawers where the family albums were kept. I hadn't looked in there for years. It was too painful. But today, something drew me to these fragments of the past. Pulling out the bottom drawer, I took out a worn album in a leather binding. On the first page was a wedding photo. I was in a simple white dress, James in his only suit. We were both young, unsmiling, looking straight at the camera. Even on a day like that, we didn't allow ourselves to be frivolous. Flipping through a few pages, I found the first photos of Tamsin, a tiny bundle in my awkward hands. I remember that moment. I remember the fear I felt looking at this tiny creature, completely dependent on me. The next photos are of Tamsin when she was older. Here she is at 5, standing on the pier with a butterfly net. She has a serious expression on her face, like an adult. At that age, she often tried to tell me about the butterflies she saw and her imaginary adventures, and I was always too busy to listen. Later, Tamsin, I have to finish my report. Butterflies don't live by the sea. You're confusing them with seagulls. Stop daydreaming and do something useful. God, did I really say that to a 5-year-old child? Here are her school photos. Tamsin with certificates for her achievements in math and science. I insisted that she focus on those subjects, believing they were the only ones worth her attention. When she brought home a certificate for winning a story contest, I barely glanced at it. Writing won't feed you, Tamsin. You better stick to physics. With each photo, a heavy feeling grew inside me. I saw my daughter's face change from open and curious in early childhood to closed and wary in adolescence. When did this change happen? Or was it gradual, year after year, disappointment after disappointment? The last photo in the album is of Tamsin in her prom dress. She's standing next to me, a noticeable distance between us. I remember that day. She wanted to go to art college, but I insisted on science. It's a waste of your potential, Tamsin. Artists starve in attics. You deserve better. I slammed the album shut, feeling sick. Why hadn't I seen this before? Why hadn't I noticed how my words hurt her? Suddenly, other words came to mind. Not mine, but my mother's. Dreams don't pay the bills, Martha. You think too much of yourself. There's no room for sentimentality in life. I hated those phrases and swore to myself that I would never be as cold and practical as she was. And now here I was, repeating the same words to Tamsin, word for word. A knock at the door snapped me out of my painful memories. I wasn't expecting any visitors and wasn't sure I wanted to see anyone, but the knocking was insistent. Standing on the doorstep was Heather, my only friend, if you can call someone you keep at arm's length a friend. "Martha, you look terrible," she said, instead of a greeting. "What happened?" "Nothing," I replied automatically, stepping back to let her in. Heather glanced around the living room. Scattered photo albums, a cup of half-drunk tea, me in the rumpled clothes I'd slept in. "Of course nothing," she said sarcastically. "I saw Tamsin and her family leaving yesterday. They were supposed to stay for the weekend, weren't they?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Something happened," Heather said affirmatively, taking off her jacket. "I'll put the kettle on, and you tell me about it." She walked into the kitchen, moving confidently, as if she were in her own home. I followed her like a shadow, unable to resist. "Tamsin says I'm toxic." The words came out before I could stop them as Heather filled the kettle. "She brought in a psychologist. She said I'm traumatizing her grandchildren and that they need to be protected from me." Heather froze, then slowly turned to me. "She said that?" "Yes. No, not exactly." I slumped into a chair, feeling weak. "She said my behavior is toxic, that I need to learn to be safe before she'll let the kids see me." Heather silently put the kettle on the stove and sat down across from me. "Tell me everything from the beginning," she asked, and I told her. About Tamsin arriving with the children, about my reaction to Liam's puzzle, about the unexpected visit from the psychologist, about the painful conversation that followed, about the torn photo, the sleepless night, the old albums full of memories that now looked completely different. Heather listened silently, without interrupting. When I finished, she stared out the window at the lighthouse for a long time. "You know," she finally said, "I've always admired you, Martha. Your strength, your independence. But sometimes I thought you were too demanding, not just of others, but of yourself." "Do you think I'm toxic too?" I asked bitterly. "No," Heather shook her head. "I think you're someone who has done what you believe is right your whole life. You were a lighthouse keeper, responsible for other people's lives. That has left its mark on everything you do. But," I sensed there was more to come, "but sometimes your directness can hurt," Heather said gently, "especially children. They don't need constant reminders of how dangerous the world is. They need to know that despite all the dangers, they are loved and accepted at home just the way they are." Her words echoed in my head. Wasn't that what I had lacked in my childhood? Unconditional acceptance, support, confidence that I was loved simply for who I was, not for my achievements or practical skills. "My mother was exactly like that," I said quietly. "Cold, practical, always ready to point out my flaws. I hated it. I swore I would never be like that with Tamsin." "And yet you did," Heather finished for me. "It happens a lot. We unconsciously repeat the patterns of behavior we saw as children, even if we swore we would never do so." I remembered my mother, tall, straight, with perpetually pursed lips. She rarely praised and often criticized. "You have to be stronger, Martha. Stop whining. No one will feel sorry for you. Only those who can take care of themselves survive in this world." These phrases have haunted me my whole life, and now I hear them coming out of my own mouth, directed at my grandchildren. "I didn't mean to hurt them," I said, feeling tears welling up in my throat. "I wanted to prepare them for life, to make them strong." "I know," Heather covered my hand with hers. "But children don't become stronger from criticism. They become stronger when they feel loved and protected, when they know they can take risks and fail and still be loved." The kettle boiled on the stove, but neither of us moved to turn it off. "What am I supposed to do now?" I asked. "Tamsin won't let me see my grandchildren until I go to therapy. But at my age, can I really change?" Heather stood up and turned off the stove. "Age has nothing to do with it, Martha. People change when they want to change, when they realize that the price of old habits is too high." She took out the cups and made tea. It was a familiar ritual that we had repeated hundreds of times, but today it felt different. Like a cracked mirror, I saw myself and my life in a completely new, distorted, but perhaps more truthful light. "You know," Heather said, placing the cup in front of me, "when I worked at the nature reserve, there was a bird, an old falcon with a damaged wing. He couldn't fly and was angry at the whole world. He attacked anyone who tried to get close to him. But gradually, with patience and constant care, he began to trust. He never became tame, but he stopped seeing every person as a threat." "I'm not a baby, Heather," I said irritably. "No," she agreed with a slight smile. "You're much more complicated than a falcon. But the principle is the same. Trust is built gradually, and it's never too late to start the process. I took a sip of tea, trying to make sense of her words. Trust. I had never considered that my grandchildren might not trust me, or that Tamsin might have stopped trusting me when she was a child. I was never a good mother, was I? I asked, afraid to hear the answer. Heather thought for a moment before replying. You were the mother you could be, given your past, your personality, and the circumstances of your life. You did what you thought was right, but maybe now it's time to rethink what right means. I nodded, looking out the window at the lighthouse. All my life, I had looked to it as a constant, reliable symbol of duty and responsibility. But maybe some aspects of life needed other points of reference. That psychologist, Dr. Price, she left her card, I said, not looking at Heather. Do you think I should call her? What do you think? Heather replied with a question. I was silent for a long time, gathering my thoughts. I'm afraid, I finally admitted. I'm afraid she'll confirm all the worst things Tamsin said about me, that I really am toxic, that I've hurt my own child without even realizing it. And if she does? Heather asked gently. If she confirms that some of your actions were harmful, then what? Isn't it better to know the truth and have a chance to fix things than to remain in the dark and lose your family? Her logic was flawless, as always. Heather was the only person who was never afraid to tell me the truth. Maybe that's why we've remained friends after all these years. I know you're right, I sighed, but that doesn't make the choice any easier. The most important choices are rarely easy, Heather remarked, especially those that involve admitting your own mistakes. We finished our tea in silence. Then Heather helped me pick up the photo albums scattered around the living room. I stopped her when she went to put the torn photo back. Leave it, I said. I want to glue it back together, as a symbol, as a reminder that what is torn can be mended. Maybe not perfectly, the seam will always be visible, but still. Heather nodded understandingly. When she was about to leave, I walked her to the door. At the threshold, she turned around and hugged me tightly, something we didn't usually do. I froze in surprise, but then awkwardly hugged her back. You'll be fine, Martha, she said. You're a strong woman. Strong doesn't mean tough. True strength comes from the ability to recognize your weaknesses and work on them. After she left, I stood at the window for a long time, looking at the lighthouse. How many storms had it weathered in its long history? How many times had its light saved ships from disaster? And yet, even lighthouses need repairs, renovations, and replacement of outdated mechanisms with more modern ones. Maybe it's time for me to update what's outdated inside me. Replace the rigid principles I inherited from my mother with something more flexible, more loving. I took Dr. Price's business card out of my robe pocket. Tomorrow, I decided. Tomorrow, I'll call her. Not for Tamsin or my grandchildren, although, of course, for them too. But first and foremost for myself, because for the first time in many years, I saw myself in the mirror. Not a proud lighthouse keeper, but a lonely, frightened woman who was repeating her mother's mistakes, not knowing how to fix them. It was time to break the vicious circle. It was time to learn a new language, the language of acceptance, support, and unconditional love. I didn't know if I could master it at my age, but I knew for sure that I had to try. For 3 days, I gathered my courage to call Dr. Price. The business card lay on the kitchen table, and every time I walked past it, I slowed down, looked at the neat black letters printed on thick white paper, and walked on. Something inside me resisted making that call more than I could admit to myself. On the 4th day, Heather came in to check on me, and seeing the untouched card, silently handed me the phone. Her eyes said, "It's time," and I gave in. Dr. Price answered on the 3rd ring. Her voice sounded as professionally calm as it had when we first met. She showed no surprise or judgment for my delay in calling. "I'm glad you called, Mrs. Fallowfield," she said. "When would be a good time to meet?" "The sooner the better," I replied, afraid I would change my mind. I need to see my grandchildren." "I understand," she said with sincere sympathy in her voice. "I can offer tomorrow at 10 in the morning. My office is in the center of Port Haven on Myack Street." The irony did not escape me. The psychologist who was supposed to help me let go of the past worked on a street named after the thing that had defined my entire life. "I'll be there tomorrow at 10, I said, and hung up. Heather, who had been silently watching the conversation, nodded approvingly. "Do you want me to walk you there?" she offered. "No," I shook my head. "This is something I have to do myself." I hardly slept that night. Fragments of thoughts, memories, and doubts swirled in my head. What if the psychologist said I was hopeless, that I was 65 and too old to change, that the damage I had done to Tamsin and my grandchildren was irreparable? In the morning, I put on my best suit, dark blue, conservative, the one I used to wear to official meetings related to the lighthouse. I felt like I was going into battle, not healing. Dr. Price's office was on the second floor of an old brick building. There were no signs, just a small plaque with her name on the door. I knocked, feeling my heart pound. "Come in!" her voice rang out. The room was unexpectedly cozy. Soft lighting, bookshelves, two comfortable armchairs facing each other. There was no couch, as I had somehow expected. "I'm glad to see you, Mrs. Fallowfield," Dr. Price said, rising to meet me. "Please make yourself comfortable." I sat down in the armchair she offered me, keeping my back unnaturally straight and my hands folded in my lap, a posture that was meant to convey control and restraint. "Before we begin," Dr. Price said, "I want to remind you that everything we discuss will remain between us. I will not discuss the content of our sessions with your daughter unless you wish me to. But won't you report to her on my progress?" I asked, with poorly concealed bitterness. "So she can decide if I'm safe enough for her grandchildren?" Dr. Price shook her head. "I'm not a judge or a supervisor, Mrs. Fallowfield. My job is to help you understand yourself and your relationships with your loved ones. If at any point you feel ready to meet your grandchildren, we can arrange a family session. But the decision is yours, not mine or your daughter's." Her words calmed me a little, although I remained wary. "Where do we start?" I asked. "Perhaps you could tell me why you decided to come," she suggested. "What is important to you in this process?" I took a deep breath. "My grandchildren," I said simply. "I want to see my grandchildren again." "I understand," Dr. Price nodded. "Is there anything else that concerns you about the situation?" I wanted to respond sharply that I was troubled by the injustice, that my own daughter was accusing me of somehow traumatizing her, that I had been cut off from my family as if I were some kind of dangerous criminal. But instead, to my surprise, I said, "I'm afraid Tamsin is right, that I really don't know how to be a good grandmother, a good mother, that I'm repeating my mother's mistakes without even realizing it." Dr. Price nodded thoughtfully. "That's a very important realization," she said. "Many people are unable to even entertain the idea that their behavior might be problematic. You've already taken the first step by acknowledging that possibility." "That's easy to say," I sighed. "What am I supposed to do with that realization? How do I fix something I don't even always notice?" "That's exactly what we're going to work on," she replied. "Let's start by understanding the patterns of behavior you picked up from your mother. Tell me a little about her. What was she like?" I hadn't expected the conversation to turn to my childhood so quickly. It seemed irrelevant, a distraction from the real problem, but I forced myself to answer. "Strict," I said after a pause. "Demanding, practical to the core. No unnecessary emotions, no I love you, no hugs, just work, chores, responsibilities." "And your father?" "He died when I was 9, an accident at the sawmill." My mother was left alone with 3 children, and I was the oldest. "That must have been difficult," Dr. Price nodded. "How did your life change after his death?" "It became harsher." I searched for words, trying to describe something I had never spoken about before. My mother worked 2 jobs. I looked after my younger siblings. I didn't have a childhood in the usual sense. I had responsibilities that had to be fulfilled. And when you couldn't cope with those responsibilities, I flinched, remembering my mother's stern gaze, her tight lips, her harsh words. "She was disappointed," I finally said. "She never hit us, no. But she knew how to make me feel like I had let her down, let the family down. I thought you were more responsible, Martha. You can't be relied on. If you can't do something as simple as that, how are you going to survive in this world?" "And how did you feel when you heard those words?" "Guilty. Not good enough." I swallowed the lump that had suddenly formed in my throat. I tried very hard to be perfect, to never make mistakes, to never show weakness. And when did you do something well? When did you exceed expectations? I thought hard, trying to remember a single instance of my mother praising me. She didn't praise me, I finally said. It was expected. I was supposed to study hard, help around the house, look after my brothers. It was my duty, nothing to be praised for. Dr. Price was silent for a moment, allowing me to process my own words. Then she asked, "How did you react when Liam showed you his puzzle? Or when Astrid told you about her fairies?" I felt my face flush. The similarity was too obvious. I pointed them toward more practical activities, I admitted. But that's different. The world is a cruel place, and I want them to be prepared for it. Just as your mother wanted you to be prepared? I didn't know how to respond. "Mrs. Fallowfield," Dr. Price continued gently, "what you are describing is what psychologists call conditional love. The child feels valued and accepted only when he or she meets certain expectations. If they don't meet those expectations, they are rejected or criticized. My mother loved us," I objected. "She did everything she could to help us survive after my father died." "I don't doubt that," the psychologist nodded. "But the way she expressed that love was conditioned by her own upbringing and difficult circumstances. And now you are unconsciously repeating the same pattern with your grandchildren." I was silent, thinking about her words. They hurt, but deep down, I knew they were true. "What should I do?" I finally asked. "How can I fix this?" "Awareness is the first step," Dr. Price replied. "Now that you can see this pattern, you can start noticing when it shows up in your behavior. We'll work on alternative ways to respond." "That sounds abstract," I said, not hiding my skepticism. "Let's start with a specific example," she suggested. "Think back to your last conversation with Liam. When he showed you his puzzle, what did you really feel?" I thought back, trying to reconstruct the moment. Liam standing in front of me with a wooden box in his hands, his wary gaze as if he already knew what I was going to say. I began, but stopped myself. What did I really feel? Annoyance, probably, that he was wasting his time on toys when he could be learning something useful. "What else?" Dr. Price gently prodded. "What other emotions were there?" I closed my eyes, trying to be honest with myself. "Incomprehension," I finally admitted. "I don't understand these complicated mechanisms. I don't understand why they're necessary, and maybe a little fear." "Fear?" Dr. Price raised her eyebrows. "Yes." I was surprised by this realization. "Fear that I won't be able to help him with this. What if he asks me something about his puzzle, and I don't know the answer? What if he realizes that his old grandmother doesn't know anything about modern technology?" "That's a very important realization," Dr. Price said. "Many of our automatic reactions are based on fear. Fear of being incompetent, unprepared, not good enough." "Like my mother," I muttered. "Perhaps," she nodded. "But now that you're aware of that fear, you can choose a different response. For example, what could you say to Liam instead of criticizing his hobby?" I thought about it, imagining myself standing in front of my grandson again, showing me his work. "I could ask him how it works," I said slowly. "Ask him to explain it to me. Show my interested confusion, not my irritation." "Excellent," Dr. Price smiled. "It would create a completely different atmosphere, wouldn't it? Instead of feeling that his interests are unimportant or silly, Liam would feel that you value his knowledge, that you are interested in his opinion." I nodded, imagining how Liam's face would change if I had responded that way. But then I was overcome with doubt. "What if it seems fake?" I asked. "What if he realizes I'm just pretending to be interested?" "Children are very sensitive to insincerity," Dr. Price agreed. "But I'm not suggesting you pretend. I'm suggesting you try to take a genuine interest in his world. You may never become a puzzle enthusiast, but you can appreciate the intelligence and perseverance Liam puts into making them." The session went on for almost another hour. We talked about my relationship with Tamsin, how my upbringing had influenced my parenting style, how difficult it was for me to express emotions and affection. When the time came to end the session, Dr. Price gave me a small homework assignment to write down moments when I noticed myself reacting in ways similar to my mother. Awareness is the first step toward change, she repeated. Just observe yourself without judgment. Notice the patterns. I left her office with mixed feelings. On the one hand, it was painful to admit that I was repeating my mother's mistakes, despite all my vows to be different. On the other hand, there was a tiny glimmer of hope that maybe all was not lost. Maybe I really could learn to be a different grandmother, a different person. Over the next 2 weeks, I faithfully attended sessions with Dr. Price and kept a journal as she suggested. I wrote down my automatic reactions, the moments when I heard my mother's voice in my head, the situations in which I caught myself wanting to criticize or control. Gradually, I began to see patterns. For example, I reacted particularly strongly to anything that seemed impractical or a waste of time. Astrid's fantasies, Liam's mechanical puzzles, even Tamsin's fascination with antique music boxes. All of these things automatically irritated me. But it was precisely these hobbies that made them happy, gave them joy and satisfaction. Why did I resist this so much? Why did I think that life should only be practical, only useful? Because that's what my mother taught me? Or because I myself was afraid of impracticality, afraid that if I allowed myself to dream, to fantasize, to do something just for pleasure, then what? Would I become vulnerable? Would I lose control? During the 3rd session, I told Dr. Price about my observations. You know what's strange? I said. I'm starting to notice that I actually envy them. Astrid with her fairies, Liam with his puzzles, they know how to enjoy life, and I've always been so focused on survival, on doing the right, safe things, that I've completely forgotten how to be happy. That's a very important realization. Dr. Price nodded. Many people who grow up emotionally deprived or in constant struggle for survival have difficulty enjoying life. It's as if they don't allow themselves to be happy. My mother definitely considered joy an unacceptable luxury, I said with a bitter smile. Life is hard work, Martha, not entertainment. How many times had I heard that phrase? What about your husband? Dr. Price asked. What was he like? I smiled as I remembered James. For the first time in a long time, these memories didn't bring only pain. He was my complete opposite, I said. Calm, gentle. He knew how to find joy in the little things, in a beautiful sunset, in a bird's song, in a well-caught fish. I always wondered how he could be so carefree when there was so much to worry about. Why do you think you were attracted to those qualities in him? I thought about it. Probably because they were so different from me, I finally said, from my family, from everything I knew. With him, I felt protected, I guess, like I didn't have to be on guard all the time. It sounds like he gave you what you lacked in your childhood, Dr. Price remarked, a sense of security, acceptance, permission to be happy. I nodded, feeling tears welling up in my throat. And when he died, the psychologist continued quietly, you fell back on the only model you knew, your mother's model. Yes, I whispered. I didn't know how to be different, how to raise Tamsin on my own, how to cope with it all. I just did what I knew how to do, and now you're doing the same thing with your grandchildren, Dr. Price summarized gently. But the difference is that now you're beginning to recognize this pattern and understand that you have a choice. You can choose a different path. In the 4th session, we talked about my relationship with Tamsin, about how my emotional unavailability affected her, how my high expectations and constant criticism made her feel inadequate and unloved. You know what the hardest part is? I said, looking out the office window at the glimpse of the harbor, admitting that she's right. That I really was a toxic mother, that I hurt her without even realizing it. Admission is an act of tremendous courage, said Dr. Price. Many people spend their entire lives denying their mistakes because the truth is too painful. You are doing what many are incapable of doing. What now? I asked. How do I fix what I've done? First comes acknowledgement, then understanding, then behavior change, and only then can the relationship heal, she replied. You've already started the first 2 stages. Now it's time for the 3rd, changing your behavior. How can I do that if Tamsin won't let me see them? Perhaps it's time for a family session, suggested Dr. Price. If you feel ready, I could invite Tamsin to our next meeting." I swallowed, feeling my stomach tighten with fear. But what if she doesn't want to come? What if she's decided I'm hopeless? "Your daughter came to me because she believes you can change," Dr. Price reminded me gently. "If she thought you were hopeless, she would have simply cut off all contact. The fact that she brought me to you shows that she wants to maintain a relationship, even if it's on new terms." I nodded, feeling both fear and hope. "All right," I said. "Invite her." I spent the next 2 days in nervous anticipation. Would Tamsin agree to meet? What would I say to her? How could I explain everything I had begun to understand about myself, about us, about our past? The evening before the scheduled session, I sat on the porch, watching the lighthouse twinkling in the gathering twilight. All my life, I had been so sure that I knew what was right, that I was doing everything necessary to prepare Tamsin for the harsh reality. But in reality, I was just repeating the only model I knew, without thinking about the price we were all paying for it. A phone call snapped me out of my reverie. It was Dr. Price. "Mrs. Fallowfield," she said, "I spoke with your daughter. She has agreed to meet with me." "When?" I asked, feeling my heart pound in my chest. "Tomorrow, as planned, 10 o'clock in my office." "Will she be coming alone or with the children?" "Alone," the psychologist replied. "I suggested starting with the two of you. If things go well, we can arrange a meeting with the grandchildren later." I nodded, although she couldn't see me on the phone. "Thank you," I said. "I'll be ready." But was I really ready? Ready to admit my mistakes to my daughter? Ready to hear how my behavior had affected her? Ready for possible rejection if she didn't think I had changed enough? I didn't know. All I knew was that I had to try, for Tamsin, for Liam, and Astrid, and maybe, for the first time in my life, for myself. That night, I dreamed about my mother. She was standing on top of a lighthouse looking out at the sea, her gray hair blowing in the wind. I was climbing up an endless spiral staircase toward her, but every time I almost reached the top, the steps beneath me began to crumble and fall away. "You have to be stronger, Martha," she said, without turning around. "I'm trying, Mom," I replied, scrambling up the crumbling steps. "Trying isn't enough." Her voice sounded farther and farther away, even though the distance between us wasn't increasing. "You have to be perfect. Only then will you be safe." I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding. It was 4 in the morning. I had 6 hours until I had to meet Tamsin. Trying to calm myself, I did something I had never done before. I wrote down my dream. Dr. Price said that dreams often reflect our hidden fears and conflicts, and this dream seemed like such a clear symbol, my mother at the top of the lighthouse, the unattainable ideal I had always strived for, the crumbling steps, my attempts to live up to her expectations, which were never good enough, and her words about safety. Safety, the very word Tamsin used. "You have to learn to be safe." Suddenly, I realized that I had confused safety with control my whole life. I thought I was protecting Tamsin and my grandchildren by controlling them, pointing out dangers, criticizing impractical hobbies, but in reality, I was creating an emotionally unsafe environment for them, where love was always conditional on meeting my expectations. In the morning, I arrived at Dr. Price's office 15 minutes early. She greeted me with her usual calmness and offered me tea while we waited for Tamsin. "How are you feeling?" she asked as I sat down in the familiar chair, clutching the cup in my hands. "Scared," I replied honestly, "and hopeful. It's a strange combination." "Very natural," she smiled. "Change is always scary, even when we want it." There was a knock at the door at exactly 10 o'clock. My heart leapt into my throat. Dr. Price opened the door and Tamsin entered the office. She looked tense, but determined. Our eyes met for a moment, and I saw a mixture of wariness and hope? Or was I just wanting to believe that? "Hello, Tamsin," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hello, Mom." She nodded and sat down in the chair opposite me, keeping her distance. Dr. Price took her seat and began the session by explaining the purpose of our meeting: to create a safe space for dialogue where each of us could express our feelings and needs without fear of being rejected or judged. "Martha," she said, turning to me, "perhaps you'd like to start. Share with Tamsin what you've been thinking about over the last few weeks." I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. Everything I had rehearsed the night before flew out of my head. All that remained was the raw, unedited truth. "Tamsin," I began, looking my daughter in the eyes, "first of all, I want to say that you were right. My behavior, my attitude toward you, toward your children, it was wrong. I hurt you without even realizing it." I saw her eyes widen in surprise. She was probably expecting resistance, excuses, a counterattack, everything that was my usual style of communication. "I was repeating the pattern I saw in my own childhood," I continued. "My mother taught me that love must be earned, that emotions were weakness, that dreams and passions were luxuries I couldn't afford. And I passed those toxic beliefs on to you, and now I was trying to pass them on to Liam and Astrid." Tamsin sat motionless, her face impenetrable. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," I said, feeling tears welling up in my throat. "What I did can't be fixed with a simple 'I'm sorry.' But I want you to know that I'm working on myself. I'm learning to see these patterns and change them. I want to be safe. For you, for the children. I want to learn to love you the way you deserve to be loved. Unconditionally." Tamsin was silent for a long time, staring at her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but firm. "I didn't expect that," she admitted. "I thought you would resist, deny it, accuse me of being ungrateful." "I understand why you thought that." I nodded. "I always reacted that way." "Yes." She looked up. "You know what was the most painful? Not your criticism, not your high standards. It was that I never felt that I was good enough for you, just the way I am." Her words hit me right in the heart because I knew that feeling all too well. I felt the same way about my mother. "I always tried so hard to earn your approval," Tamsin continued. "I tried to be perfect, to do everything right, and when I realized I'd never live up to your standards, I just pulled away. I withdrew into myself, and then physically, to college, to another city, to another life." "I didn't want that," I whispered. "I wanted to protect you, to prepare you for life." "I know," she nodded. "I know now, but back then, I just felt like I wasn't good enough, like I would never be good enough." Dr. Price gently interjected. "Tamsin, what do you think you need from your mother right now? What would help you begin the process of healing your relationship?" Tamsin thought for a moment. "I want you to see me," she finally said, turning to me. "Not the perfect daughter I never was, not the disappointment I often felt I was, just me, with all my strengths and weaknesses. And I want the same for my children. I want you to see them for who they are, not measure them against some standard of who you think they should be." I nodded, feeling tears streaming down my cheeks. I hadn't cried since James died, but now I couldn't hold them back. "I'll try," I said. "I'm learning. It's not easy, but I really want to learn." Tamsin looked at me for a long time, as if trying to see something behind the familiar mask of sternness I had worn for so many years. "I believe you," she finally said, "and I want us to try again. Not just for the children, but for you and me." The rest of the session was more relaxed. We discussed specific steps, regular meetings with Dr. Price, gradually resuming contact with my grandchildren, first under Tamsin's supervision, and then perhaps more freely. When the session came to an end, Tamsin and I left the office together. It was drizzling outside, typical for Port Haven. "Do you have an umbrella?" I asked. "No," she shook her head. "But it's just rain, I won't melt." I smiled, recognizing my own practicality in those words, but without the usual harshness. Can I invite you for tea?" I asked uncertainly. "At that cafe on the waterfront?" Tamsin hesitated only for a moment. "Yes," she said. "I'd like that." We walked through the wet streets of Port Haven, keeping a little distance between us, but still together. The conversation was awkward. Too much had been said in the last hour, too many emotions to process, but there was no tension in the silence. It was expectant, like the fog over the sea before dawn. We took a table by the window in a cafe overlooking the harbor. The lighthouse was visible in the distance, blurred by rain and fog. Symbolic, I thought. My own inner lighthouse, the system of values and beliefs I had followed all my life, was now also shrouded in fog of doubt. But maybe when the fog clears, I'll see it in a new light? "How are the kids?" I asked when our tea was served. "Fine," Tamsin replied. "Liam is still getting ready for his camp at MIT. Astrid finished her diorama for her school project. She got an A. "I'm glad," I said sincerely. "Do they ask about me?" Tamsin hesitated, as if weighing whether to tell me the truth. "Astrid does," she finally said. "She misses you. Liam, it's more complicated. He doesn't talk about you, but I noticed he took that photo of you together on the pier with him. He keeps it in his room." I felt tears welling up in my throat again. I wiped them away surreptitiously. "I'd like to see them," I said, "when you think it's possible." "Maybe next weekend?" Tamsin suggested. "We could come over for a couple of hours, just see how it goes." "I'd really like that," I nodded. We finished our tea talking about neutral things, the weather, the latest town news, Tamsin's work. Before leaving, she unexpectedly covered my hand with hers. "I'm glad you decided to give it a try, Mom," she said quietly. "It means a lot to me." I squeezed her hand in response, not trusting my voice. As we said goodbye outside the cafe, I wasn't sure if it was appropriate to hug her. We hadn't hugged in years. But Tamsin took the initiative and quickly, awkwardly wrapped her arms around me. It lasted only a second, but it meant more to me than I could express in words. "See you at the weekend," she said, stepping back. "See you," I echoed. Watching her walk away along the promenade, I felt a strange mixture of sadness, hope, and determination. The road ahead of me was long and unclear. I had only taken the first steps, and there was no guarantee that I would be able to change deeply ingrained patterns of behavior. But for the first time in many years, I felt that I was moving in the right direction. When I got home, I took an old box of photographs out of a drawer in my dresser. Among them was one I had almost forgotten. Me, very young, holding newborn Tamsin in my arms. My face had a strange expression, a mixture of pride, love, and fear. I was afraid I wouldn't be able to cope, afraid that I wouldn't be able to protect this tiny human being from all the dangers of the world. That fear had never gone away over the years. It simply transformed into harshness, control, a constant desire to prepare Tamsin, and later my grandchildren, for the harsh reality of life. I thought I was protecting them, but in reality I was simply passing on my fear to them. What if instead I could give them something else? The confidence that they are loved just as they are. Support in their exploration of the world, even if that exploration seems impractical to me. A safe space where they can be themselves, make mistakes, learn and grow without fear of disappointing me. It sounded so simple and yet so difficult. Changing lifelong habits and rewriting internal beliefs is no easy task, especially at my age. But did I have a choice? Continuing as before meant losing my family, and that was a price I wasn't willing to pay. That night, looking at the lighthouse from my bedroom window, I thought about how the light that guides ships must be both bright and soft. Too bright and it blinds you, too dim and you can't see it in a storm. Maybe love is the same. It has to be strong enough to guide, but soft enough not to burn. I didn't know if I would ever achieve that balance, but I knew for sure that I would try. For Tamsin, for Liam and Astrid. And maybe, for the first time in my life, for myself.